Race strategies can get really complicated very quickly when you start discussing. There are just too many unknown variables. Like a race strategy typically depends on which position you're starting in the grid, who is ahead of you, what kind of car are you in? Are you in a midfield car? Are you in a front runner car? Are you in good tires, fresher tires? Which compound of tires are you on? Is there a crash in the first lap? Understanding race strategies feel like a mathematical and like complicated logical problem. In reality, race strategies are a huge math and logics problem. In fact, there are massive supercomputers solving this on real time, where every change in parameter over like a few seconds is calculated and the optimum output of a race is given to the engineer so that the drivers get the best result in every race. So that is the point of a race strategy. But just because something is very difficult to solve doesn't mean it is very difficult to understand. Over the last 75 years, Formula One has done enough experimenting to figure out like a handful of strategies, maybe 10 or 12 strategies that you will probably see in almost every race. So getting to know those few strategies actually directly helps you understand quite a lot of race tactics and strategies used by different teams. Let's simplify these race strategies and talk about them. For simplicity's sake, I've bucketed them into 4 categories, but I do want to add that in a given race, each driver or a team might use a combination of 2 or 3 of these strategies in a single race. So strategies evolve through the race, so nothing is set in stone at the beginning of the race. So the 4 categories that I want to talk about are firstly the core tire strategies. Then there is overtake via pit strategies. We also have some incident-based strategies and then some defensive strategies. Let's go straight into our first category, which are the tire strategies. Now, before we start dissecting these strategies, I do want to highlight a couple of rules and information that you need to know about Formula One tires. Formula One tires basically are made by a single entity called Pirelli. They have been supplying for a while now, and Pirelli has a huge set of compounds. Last year we had 6 compounds for dry tires. This year we have 5. Basically it starts from C1 to C5, where C1 being the hardest tire and C5 being the softest tire. Now the difference between a hard tire and a soft tire is hard tire is very hard, which means it lasts long, but it gives very little grip in comparison. The opposite, which is a soft tire, actually gives a lot of grip, but yes, it is soft, which means it degrades very quickly, so it doesn't have a long life. Pirelli, based on how the track has been performing, what are the updates that has happened to the track, how harsh is the track surface on the car, all of that they will have past data, and they decide well in advance that for a given track we will have 3 out of these 5 compounds as soft, medium and hard. For example, let's take Suzuka. Suzuka is a very harsh circuit for Formula One tires because it has a mix of low speed and medium speed and high speed corners. It actually ruins the tires. So Pirelli brings their hardest 3 compounds, C1, C2, C3, where C1 is the hard, C2 is the medium and C3 is the soft. Whereas in the polar opposite side of things, where for example, when we take a Monza, which is called a Temple of Speed, it is a high-speed circuit. There are barely any corners in that circuit, and Pirelli gives C3, C4 and C5 as hard, medium and soft. These dry compound tires are also called as slicks, and there are wet weather tires as well. There are 2 kinds of tires, which is inters and wets. Intermediate tires are for drizzles and mild rain. Basically, when half the race is a dry race and then suddenly it starts drizzling, it isn't a heavy downpour, but some parts of the track is wet and some part of the track is dry, then they go for inters. Wets are fully for wet weather tracks where literally the track is aquaplaning. So that's about the tires. There is one important rule in every Formula One race at the moment, which is every driver has to use at least 2 sets of compounds in every race, which effectively means every driver has to pit at least once, and he has to use 2 different compounds of tires in a single race. Now that we've gotten all of these information out of the way, let's start talking strategies. The 2 most popular strategies in a Formula One race are the single stop and the multi-stop strategy. Single stop strategy or one stop strategy, as the name suggests, basically has only one stop. You basically come into the pit, change the tires, and then you go out, and that's it. You finish the race with that set of tires. 2-stop or a multiple pit stop strategy actually is exactly what it says as a title. You will have multiple pit stop. Now, every pit stop is costly. Think about it. A car slows down to enter into the pit lane, and in the pit lane there is a speed limit of 80 or sometimes 60 kilometers an hour, and then the car stops idle for 2 to 3 seconds for the tires to be changed, and then the car comes out and goes all the way till the pit exit in the same top speed limit, and then it goes out, all the while the rest of the cars on the track are going at it in full speed. So if pit stops are going to be that costly, why on earth would somebody do more than one pit stop? That's where the choice of tires come into these tire strategy discussions. Let us say we have car 1 and car 2. Car 1 is on a one-stop strategy. Car 2 is on a two-stop strategy. Let's say the race is 60 laps long. Car 1 and car 2 both start on a medium tire. I'm going to oversimplify it a lot. We are not going to talk about traffic. We are not going to talk about any incidents. Just these two cars on track. Let's assume both of these cars pit at lap 20. They started off on medium tires, and these medium tires, they decided to pit at lap 20. Car number 1 is on a one-stop strategy, which means they have to do another 40 laps in a single tire. So they go on the hard tires. Now, car number 2 is planning on a two-stop strategy, so they are pitting into soft tires. The difference between a hard tire and a soft tire in terms of a lap time is almost 1 second. Let's say it is 1 second, which means a soft tire is 1 second faster than a hard tire, which means over the next 20 laps, the soft tire car is going to build a lead of around 20 seconds. So at lap 40, car number 2 can afford to do another pit stop of 20 seconds, come out in another set of soft tires, and still get a 1 second advantage over the hard tire and finish the race 20 seconds ahead of car number 1. I know this is a very simplified example, but it highlights how effective a two-stop strategy can be if there is significant tire advantage. But sadly, in real life scenarios, there is going to be a lot of traffic. Catching up to the driver ahead, all of that is going to be very difficult. Overtakes and dirty air will ruin the tire much faster than they expect in a race. So definitely it is not that simple, but you get the idea of a one-stop strategy and a two-stop strategy, right? This strategy also depends on what all tires you have left after qualifying and practice sessions. And every race starts with one of these two strategies. Every team and every driver has either a one-stop or a multi-stop strategy. That is the blank canvas that every team uses to start planning for a race. Between these two strategies, one is not better than the other. Basically, it all depends on what kind of car are you driving, which grid position are you starting in. If you are starting way ahead of everyone, you're going to get a lot of clean air. That means you can afford to put on softer tires and do correct stints without the tires getting damaged. But if you are following people in traffic and there is a lot of dirty air around you, maybe a one-stop is much better because your tires last a little longer. It also depends on how good your car is. Can your car do massive overtakes? Does it have straight line speed, etc.? Now, the third strategy we're going to talk about is more a team strategy. It's called the split strategy. This is when a team puts one of their drivers in a one-stop strategy and the other in an alternate strategy, which is a two-stop or a multi-stop strategy. Why do teams do this? Effectively to neutralize the impact of a safety car or any incident. For example, if you are on a one-stop race and you have just done your pit stop and then after that, you have a safety car, which means the guy who just pitted, the driver who just pitted, had a massive hit of a bad luck because everybody else is getting a free pit stop in that spot. And he doesn't have to do a pit stop because he's already finished his pit stop, right? So in those unlucky cases, the teams don't want to have both the drivers lose out because both of the drivers are on the same strategy. So they split the strategies between teammates. Sometimes with luck, it has proven to be extremely advantageous for the second driver or the driver who started behind suddenly going ahead of the driver who started in first. There is also another strategy called the alternate strategy. Sometimes you see in the start of the race, every team is starting on the same set of tires and it's usually medium. So these teams are keeping their cards close to their chest. Basically, they don't want to show what strategy their drivers are on early in the race. They are also keeping themselves open for a one-stop or a two-stop strategy depending on how the race unfolds. An alternate strategy is when the entire grid is on medium tires and you start on a hard tire, for example. You're basically revealing what your strategy is going to be very early on to the rest of the teams. And the advantage is you start off on a relatively hard tire and you go as long as possible. You avoid the first lap chaos. And if a safety car comes, you try to take advantage of it. Or if there is no safety cars, you just make up as much spots as possible by not pitting till the last minute and then put on a bunch of soft tires towards the end and then finish the race. It is a one-stop strategy in essence, but in reverse. And when teams and drivers talk to each other, they are not going to use the words one stop or a two stop. Sometimes they might use it, but in most cases it is plan A, plan B, plan C, or any code words that they may use, because most of the other teams are also listening into the driver conversations with their race engineers. So they don't want to reveal their secrets. There is a lot of bluffing going on. Usually it's code words, but we kind of, with how the race is unfolding, can figure out what that code word means. If plan A means a one stop or if plan A means two stop, we can figure that out by the context of the race. But yes, teams don't necessarily call it a one stop or a two stop. They use different code words. Now, the last tire strategy I want to talk about is the wet weather strategy. This is more a gamble than a strategy. Wet races and weather are extremely unpredictable. It pretty much neutralizes the race. It eventually comes down to a driver's skill in driving in a wet track. And these two tires, it's all about finding the exact moment where the grip in the slick tires goes away and finding the moment where the inter tires lap times is better than the slick tire lap times. It is very difficult to judge. It is a lot of times hit or a miss. That's why I don't call it a strategy. It's almost always a gamble. But there are teams who have taken advantage of getting that timing right just by making sure that they pitted their driver at the right time. They've caught up so many places in the race. So that's it for all the tire based strategies. Let's move on to the next section. Overtaking via pit strategy. So these strategies are the core part and parcel of teamwork. This is basically the team game of Formula One. Overtaking is very difficult in Formula One. Just because you have a fast car doesn't mean the driver ahead is going to let you go by. He's also going to defend. Sometimes it gets really ugly. And following another car for too long also has a massive downside to the car behind, which is because the car ahead is pushing out a lot of dirty air. All the aerodynamic efficiencies of the car behind is completely gone. Basically, all the aero is designed in a wind tunnel for a smooth laminar flow. Now, dirty air means it's disturbed air that is coming into these aerodynamics. The car stops behaving like how it behaves in a wind tunnel or in a fresh air scenario, right? So what happens is your car starts understeering, or sometimes it starts oversteering. You lose grip. You feel like you are sliding a lot, which means the tires degrade much faster and your engine starts getting hot because it's not getting cool fresh air, it's getting dirty warm air. So overtaking gets difficult, and that's why overtaking via pit strategies are super famous in Formula One. Probably the most famous and the most effective strategy that every Formula One fan must have heard of. It's called the undercut. So how does an undercut work? Let us say there are two cars, car A, car B, going around, and then there is a 2 second or less gap between these two cars, okay? The car behind is trying to overtake the car ahead, but it has been very difficult. So what does the car behind do? They pit early before the car ahead, and they come into the pits and get onto fresher tires. And when they go out, they try to get the best lap possible around the track as soon as their pit stop is done. If the car that was ahead pits in maybe 2 laps later, you effectively have done 2 fresh laps on fresh tires and you have gotten better lap times compared to the car ahead. And when the car ahead pits and comes out of the pit lane, they will join behind you. In essence, you have overtaken the car in front by pitting at the right time and pitting ahead of them. Think about it logically, right? Let us say you are pitting at lap 20 and the car ahead is pitting at lap 22. You have done 20 laps in old tires and then 2 more laps in fresh tires when the driver ahead has done 22 laps in older tires, which means you have an additional advantage of 2 laps of good lap times in good fresh tires. This undercut looks like a solid strategy to overtake when everything goes well, but in most cases things don't always go well. Firstly, there has to be the element of traffic that needs to be taken into account. As I mentioned, for a driver, the out lap as soon as you pit in, right, that outlap has to be superb. But if the team releases this driver into a bunch of traffic and he's not able to make the best time possible, then definitely the whole point of this undercut is gone. You've had a bad lap. Even when the car ahead pits 2 laps later, they're still going to emerge ahead. Now, the second problem is the undercut is such a popular strategy. Every team is expecting the other team behind to do an undercut, and they are always plotting on how to defend this undercut. So the minute somebody pits, there is going to be somebody else who pits to prevent the undercut from happening, and that will trigger a chain effect of pit stops. And that's why in a typical race, you see in a span of 2 to 3 laps, pretty much half or 70% of the grid gets their first pit stop, because everybody is trying to prevent that undercut. Now let's talk about overcut. Now this is the exact opposite of the undercut. You do not pit your driver, you just see how fast this driver can go, especially if they get a bit of fresh air. It is less degrading to the tires, which means they can go much longer than the expected lifetime of that tire. The overcut is usually used because the driver has a lot of clean air and fresh air for driving, and the overcut also is very rare in comparison to an undercut, but it does have its benefits at certain points in races, where just by building a significant lead, by extending the lifetime of the tire so much that you actually convert a 2-stop strategy into a 1-stop strategy sometimes. The overcut is the reason why you see a lot of times the front drivers, the drivers who are in the first, second and third, are the people who make the pit stop the last in the first set of pit stops, right? Why? Because they have been driving in fresh air in comparison to the rest of the grid. That means their tires degrade much lesser. Now there is a third strategy called the box opposite, which is basically, let us say there is an intense battle happening between 2 specific drivers. When the time to decide if they need to pit or not comes, you basically do the opposite of the driver in front. Box opposite or pit opposite basically means, let us say if the car ahead is driving into the pit lane, you stay out, or if the car ahead is staying out, you pit. Basically, you are doing the opposite of the car. You effectively have a chance to either choose an undercut or an overcut, depending on what your opponent is doing. And then there is the whole world of incident-based strategies. So what is an incident in Formula 1? See, there are 3 kinds of incidents. Let us say there is a small debris on the track and a marshal needs to clear it up. Or if there is a car that malfunctioned and it is parked on the side of the track and the marshals have to roll the car into safety. In these cases, you get what is called as a virtual safety car. There is no physical safety car on track, but the drivers are expected to drive somewhere around 60% of the race space. Now, if there is a crash and there is a lot of debris on track and there is going to be a lot of personnel working on the road trying to clear things up, there is going to be a crane or a tractor that is helping lift and move the car away, then a physical safety car is deployed. Now, when a physical safety car comes out, the speed drops massively, and in fact, even if the grid was so split apart, let us say by the middle of the race, there is a lot of like 10-second gaps between drivers, the grid actually gets bunched up. So a safety car neutralizes a race and all these long gaps are bunched up together. And then the third incident is called the red flag, which means the race is completely stopped. This is because the accident was massive and there has to be a lot of repairs done to the walls of the track. In this case, everyone drives back into the pit lanes and the race starts maybe after like 15 or 20 minutes. You can consider a red flag as a race restart because the grid is bunched up together again. Now, whenever there is an incident, there is going to be another term that is used. It's called as a cheap pit stop. A pit stop, right from the moment a driver enters into the pit lane all the way till he exits, it takes around 20 to 25 seconds where the time is lost. For example, like I explained, there is speed limits in the pit lane and sometimes your car is idle for 3 to 4 seconds also. So there is a lot of time lost in the pit lane, whereas rest of the cars outside are going in their full speed. But during a safety car or a virtual safety car, the rest of the grid is not driving in full speed. They are driving sometimes 60%, sometimes less than 50% of the speed, which means when you pit during a safety car or a virtual safety car, you save a lot of time because everybody else is driving slow. So you will sometimes maintain your grid positions or even jump up a few positions. And usually after a safety car, the grid gets bunched up. So in essence, you've not only gotten a cheap pit stop, you also have neutralized the race and you're starting from a better position. The timing of incidents and safety cars cannot be predicted at all, so it is always a gamble. But again, every race has more than 50% chance of having a safety car, which means it is factored into the race strategies and calculations. All the teams are effectively looking at reports where they say, if the safety car comes in this lap, what can we do? What can we decide to do? All of that is always being taken care of in terms of their calculation. And even when the safety car happens, the teams are given a few moments to decide. They basically have a few seconds to instruct the driver what to do. And that is why a lot of teams mess up these safety car restarts, because sometimes they get unlucky because the driver would have just passed the pit lane entry and then the safety car came out, or the notification of a safety car comes out, right? So there are other reasons why you could mess up a safety car pit stop. Even though there is a lot of luck involved in the timing of a safety car, it is almost always expected in a race. So teams always prepare for these scenarios. And then there is the rolling the dice strategy. This is a strategy that is purely based on hoping for a safety car in the future so that you get a cheaper pit stop. A very recent instance was in 2025's Monaco GP, where every team was mandated to do 2 pit stops. Max Verstappen was leading the race, but he had only done 1 pit stop. So he kept his lead all the way till the penultimate lap, hoping for a safety car so that he can get a cheap pit stop. But that never happened. So he pitted in the penultimate lap. And red flag strategies are basically, they are not strategies at all. The race is just neutralized and teams are free to change their tires, put on fresher tires, or even change up their strategies. Except for messing around with path for me condition things, teams are allowed to do everything else. So you can consider red flags as like a restart for a race. Now moving on to the last category, these are defensive tactics. They are not necessarily strategies by themselves. They are almost always going to work with a combination of another strategy, and also they are very situation based. One of the first strategies is the LiCo strategy. I know LiCo is a word that is very popular in the 2026 regulations because it helps recharge the battery. But before 2026, LiCo was used to be a defensive strategy. Basically, LiCo is lift and coast. Lift and coast is basically you're not on the accelerator nor on the brake pedal, right? When you do that, you are not putting pressure on your engine. Engine is not revving. Secondly, you're not putting pressure on the brakes because the brakes are too hot. So LiCo in essence is a defense strategy. You use it if there is a lot of tire wear and you have no other option but to survive the last few laps. If the engine is overheating, or if there is some issues developing in the car, especially on the engine side of things, or if the brakes are short and you have lost brakes, you do lift and coast so that your car is under control and then you eventually finish the race. Managing the gap or building the gap strategy. Now, this is a strategy where the second driver of the team goes slow enough so that the first driver goes really ahead and there is a massive gap built between them. He doesn't go slow enough that he gets overtaken, but he has built that gap for the first driver so that if the first driver pits, there is still enough gap for him to catch up to. This is more a team tactic. You may have seen races where the first few drivers are so far ahead from the rest of the grid. It's not because the rest of the grid are bad drivers or they are driving slow. They are building a gap in a defensive way so that people in the front do not lose out on any advantages. They maximize the race and maximize their points. This is a purely a team strategy where a number 2 driver helps out a number 1 driver. Mind games are not necessarily strategies, but definitely there is a lot of mind games that goes around in the paddock and between the drivers. We spoke about how important it is to pit at the right lap, right? You usually hear communication between the driver and their race strategist or their race engineer about how the tires are bad, and usually it is a bluff. The more infamous one is when Lewis Hamilton tells Bono my tires are gone and then goes on to do the fastest lap of the race. There is another bluff that some drivers do and the race engineers or the pit wall does, which is they call in the driver to pit. The garage crew is ready to receive the car to pit, but then they just go back and sit because they are basically bluffing. They are telling the team, oh, we are going to pit this lap, and then pulling off in the last minute. These mind games are not necessarily strategies or their own, they are basically tricks. But in combination with the other spoken race strategies, it does confuse the opponents a bit. It does add suspense to the race. And that is pretty much all the more popular strategies. Bear in mind, there are 20 to 22 cars at any given point of time starting a race, and everybody is on their own individual strategy. Let us say if somebody has a bad start or there is a crash in the first lap. Let us say one driver had a massively impressive start off the line and got to overtake 3-4 cars in the first lap itself. All of this plays into calculation of the race strategy because it is never a single fixed strategy. The strategy keeps evolving depending on how the race progresses and evolves. There are just too many variables. How are the hard tires behaving? How are the soft tires behaving? Next time you watch a race, you might hear communication between a racing driver and an engineer, something along the lines of, oh, that so-and-so driver got on the hards, but he is struggling right now, so we are not going on the hards, right? People are still understanding how these tracks and tires work together. So the race strategy is almost always evolving and never fixed, but it will always be a combination of whatever we have spoken about. I will also try to leave as many video examples as possible for every specific strategy. Go check out the links in the description below as well. Hopefully you found this video useful. I usually do a lot of talking about current races and the current season as well. If you want to join in those conversations, subscribe and turn on the bell icon. I will see you in the next video.